Hello, and welcome to Module 5. Today we will talk about screen presentations, or you will hear about screen presentations. You'll be adapting the kinds of elements that you created for poster presentations for screen presentations, which are more or less a linear version of what you created for your poster. That screen presentation is limited and different from your poster presentation because you have to go in the order of slides that you choose. For your poster presentation, you didn't have to go in the order in which you created things on a blank canvas. You could actually start in the upper left-hand corner, lower right-hand corner, any part of the poster you wanted. But on a screen presentation, you actually have to go in the order in which you put the slides. When you do that, you have to think about who your audience is, because you can't adjust on the fly because you had to put the slides in order for the particular audience you were planning to talk to. So think carefully about who the audience is and how do you want to reach them and what level and what order will be best for each of the audiences that you prepare for. These are just some of the things that listeners want out of presentations that you need to think about as you prepare to address the audience of your choice or the one that you were invited to talk to. You want the content to convey new information. You want an interesting question. You want something that will be novel. But on the other side, relative to clarity and organization, you want to make sure that you avoid jargon as much as possible, you make it understandable, and you make everything clear. These are all things that fit perfectly with the way you created your poster, right? Except for now you have to think a little bit more about the style and delivery because you're actually talking to a larger group of people, not just one-on-one to people at your poster. While a poster might get you 10 people at once talking, it's difficult because, again, the poster is basically 5 feet wide by 3 feet tall or some limited size. But in a room where you're presenting a talk, you in fact could be standing in front of 2 screens or 3 screens or one very large screen. So you need to think about it from a perspective of how are you going to deliver? Are you a person that likes to walk around? Are you going to be stuck behind a podium? What's the condition in which you're going to be discussing this? And just as for a poster, your expertise has to come across in the way that you present the material. So think about your reputation. Think about how you're going to make it really clear as to how you're going to do this. So when you think about the relevance for the audience that you're going to address, think about what it is you want to say, but for the most part, to be relevant to the audience, you have to think about what they're interested in. The people in the audience, if they're talking to people at a different level, whether you're talking to undergraduates, whether you're talking to other graduate students, whether you're talking to people in a company, or in a general talk to people about science to the lay public, you need to think about what they already know and what they're going to be interested in hearing about. Different talks have to fit for different audiences. They're clearly not all the same. And if you think you can give the same talk to a bunch of different audiences, then think twice. Won't work. You need to organize your talk in terms of something that people in all sorts of educational environments tell you, which is tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Part of the meaning of that message is that people are attending to lots of things when they're sitting in an audience nowadays. People are worried about where they just came from, what happened at their last meeting. If you're sitting in the middle of 6 talks, they're thinking about the previous talk, they're thinking about the next talk. You want to make sure that at the end of a talk session, where you might be talking for 12 minutes, but there's 6 of them, you want to make sure that you get your message across in a way that they'll remember it. If you don't have a full research story, then think about how you can just tell a story about what you're about to do, what you want to do for your research, what your research goals are, and then think about telling them what it is that you want to do next. There's always a story that you can tell about what you do for your research purposes. If you tell it as part of a story, it'll be much easier for somebody to remember. And so you want to always make sure that you think about techniques that are good for telling stories to begin with. A lot of that goes to things we talked about at the beginning of the semester in terms of the ABT, all, but, and therefore, as a mechanism to tell a story, where you basically lay out some of the basics. You talk about the things that are clashing, that you reach a climax in terms of things not being able to be done, and then ultimately how you slide into a resolution. And that resolution being either the key piece of data that you've generated, the key idea that you think will solve the problem, but ultimately that you're resolving something that has not been set out before by others before you. You want to make sure that you don't overcomplicate the concept. A lot of professors tend to show slides that look like the image in front of you about the space shuttle program. Don't do this. This is not a message that you want to get across to your audience. You want to make uncomplicated slides that make simple points that people can remember. You can help people follow your talk by using things called breadcrumbs. People do it in websites all the time, but you can actually do it in a talk by telling people, what part of the talk you're in. In this particular example, on the bottom, it was a talk given by a student in my lab several times over in the last several years, where it started by talking about what happened to animals during various points in life. And so her talk would start out at the beginning, certain time of pregnancy, and end when the animals that she was studying were adults. But that little gold box in the middle, you can move it along and tell people really where you were in the talk, but where that gold box moved to. Think about how boxes change the way you look at the figures that you're showing people, right? If you insert images inside of boxes, it'll draw their attention to the boxes. If you leave out the boxes, it may more readily be able to focus on the movements that would have otherwise been in the boxes. So where you draw people's eyes is where they will look, and you actually control some of that. People know this intuitively when they watch magicians, because that entire process of magic is mostly one of misdirection. So think about where you want to direct people's eyes. What's the main idea? And how do you help your audience look where you want them to look? You can tell them, look in the upper left, or you can make them look where you want them to by the way you create your slides. You don't want to use charts and visuals that are cluttered. Right, so the upper left-hand corner is your standard Excel file without anything done to it to clean it up. The one below, a little bit cleaner, and the one to the right, more of a grid line approach. But however you create your graphs, make them as simple as you can to make the point that you want. Don't use bad images, right, where junk impedes the understanding. Don't use decorations that don't add any content, that just sort of for some color reason or whatnot. Don't use generic images if you want them to remember you and your research, and try and keep them as little boring as you can imagine. Good images will clarify meaning, they'll be memorable, and they'll mostly fit your research. Humor is very dangerous to use in science, particularly when you don't know your audience really well. So unless you know your audience, try and stay away from things that you think might be funny, but your audience might not, particularly when there's multiple cultures represented in your audience. Images are more memorable than text, so you make sure that the images are the ones that you want to add information with. Don't pick images that don't fit your text, because then people will be left confused as to what the message is. Use titles to add information. So just generic titles are not very good. Think about a paper that you might write from the first part of the class where we were talking about intro and methods and results. Those are bad titles when it comes to talks. Really, you want to tell people what is the result. What's the information that you want them to see on the slide, right? You want people to be able to catch up with where you are. And labels like those on the current slide are uninformative. Saying co-immunoprecipitation could mean anything, whereas if you label it as to what they're looking at, PCBP2 specifically interacts with something, then it's a little bit clearer as to what they're looking at if they say snooze in the middle of your talk. And if you're giving a talk in a room that people turn the lights off for, some people will actually maybe close their eyes. So help people wherever you can. And be careful about PowerPoint templates and optical illusions. So the templates that the PowerPoint includes that allow you to do things in their boxes tend to be dangerous. They force you to use certain font sizes. And if you use wrong colors, particularly a red on top of a dark background, you will end up with words that seem to float in the middle of the screen. Not so much if you're looking at a regular computer-sized screen, but it looks really awkward and optical illusion-like if it's in the middle of a dark room. Try not to use backgrounds that are that will confuse your audience or make it harder to read. There was a poster a number of years ago that did this at a grad showcase meeting, and the person thought it was really cool to have a picture of a river underneath, but when you try and put a background in the back and then put letters on top, the letters become very hard to read. And that's the opposite of what you want to achieve when you're putting up slides. If you want the words to be there, then you want them to read them. And if you don't want the words to be there, then don't put them there. So images are better, but if you're going to put words, make sure they're readable. Make sure you align the edges on the things that are on your slides. This is the way that you want those aligned, whether those are 4 different lines of information. This is not the way you want to align things. Part of it is just the way that human vision works. When people see things that are out of alignment, it's distracting. And so you want to make sure that you don't put something in front of your audience that will distract from your message. You want to make sure it's accessible. So you want your fonts to be clean. You want your fonts to be readable. So make sure that they're large enough so somebody can read them from the back of a room. And you need to think about people who have vision that is not as good as yours in particular. But straight fonts that are not cursive are usually better to use, and fonts that are sort of cute, like the ones on the bottom of the screen, are frequently not going to get you taken seriously. So make sure that, again, they're easy to read and clean. Contrast is really important for the way you put up slides. So make sure the contrast is something that's useful. From the perspective of STEM or engineering, contrast maximizes the difference in pixel intensities between black and white. And so the easiest one to look at is the one in the upper left, because it is black and white. It would be pixel densities of 0 and 256. The opposite works. You can do white on dark colors, but again, that depends on what kind of room you're giving your talk in. The blue, dark blue in the upper right will actually wash out if the room is fully lit. And so you have to be careful about anything that is less contrasty than the black and white or white on black. You don't want to read your slides or your slide notes. So make sure that you pace yourself. Their slides are actually the cues that you need to deliver what the message it is that you want to deliver. And if there are words, they should augment what you're saying, but not something that you want to read straight off your slides. This is an example of a slide that was meant to be somebody's notes. And if you were watching a talk and somebody read the slide to you, you would not react very kindly. And so you should not create slides that look like this, right? It's okay to use pictures as a crutch. And scientists use crutches all the time. But just make sure that you don't clutter up your screen so that people are trying to read instead of listening to you. You want them listening to you. You can render an entire topic incredibly boring by reading word by word for what the entire text is. Now, people that are not STEM scientists frequently will actually read their talks, but then they won't actually use slides. So it's a trade-off. If you're going to use slides, then don't read them, but make sure that they augment what you are going to say. So fewer slides and simpler slides. For those of you who might use an Apple computer or an Apple iPhone, the originator of the original Apple-style talk was the original person who created the fewest, simplest slides, right? So Steve Jobs, his famous for creating slides with 5 words or less to get his message across. And in this particular slide, you're looking at 4. So respect your audience, stick to time, leave time for questions, and make sure that you know how your equipment works. There's nothing worse than walking up to a podium and not understanding how to advance your slides or how to use the laser pointer. I was at a talk in another country at some point, and somebody trying to use the laser pointer could not keep his finger off the laser pointer and burned out the batteries several times. before he was able to finish his talk. So make sure you understand how the equipment works. If that, means that you walk into the room that you're going to give the talk ahead of time, that's what you should do. And make sure that you understand how the equipment works. This points out, you use pointers, podium controls, whatever it is, just make sure you know how it works. Your conference presentation, the way you plan it, doesn't always work out the way you want. You will be remembered not for your talk as much as for when it fails, but how you actually respond to the technical difficulties. There was a talk by somebody I knew before PowerPoint was popular, when they had to use real slides, and they dropped the slides, and so they were misoriented and out of order. And the person responded really, really well. And so everyone after that talk was over remembered how well the person responded to what the circumstance was. And so, make sure that not only can you get your message across, but you can get your message across even if things go wrong. So they'll remember you for your poise and your message if you can keep it going. End with a sort of an ending slide that tells people that you're thankful for the support that went into making your work possible. Include your contact info if somebody wants to get in touch with you later, and put acknowledgments in there when there are some people that you worked with. Maybe you worked with a team of 20 people or a team of 3 people. Whatever the team is that you worked with, it's always good to leave people with an acknowledgement and how they can get back in touch with you. You have a lot of work in front of you to prepare your own slide presentation. So read up, take a look at the extra materials, and come back and look forward to examining your talks once you're done. So your deliverables for this module include the next 4 weeks. And so at least 1 or 2 of those we'll be able to check in, meet synchronously, and see how the screen presentations are going.